bulk and breakbulk supply chain management, there has been just very little change. You're still talking about, for the most part, original ocean bills of lading signed by a master and put into a FedEx envelope, FedEx envelope, ship out to move to a bank to for a letter of credit, and then sent out to the buyers to endorse in handwriting, stamped with a company stamp, and then carried up onto the ship.
That was the voice of this week's guest, Anton Posner. We really dive into supply chain logistics with a focus on the bulk and breakbulk commodities. It's an area that covers everything from warehouses to ships to inland rail, and I really hope you enjoy this discussion. In marketing, they talk about call to action, or CTA. You know what it is, you've seen it. It's buy now, listen now, subscribe now, and what have you. It's everywhere. Normally, marketers will only give you one CTA, but today I'm actually going to give you two. So the first one is please leave a 5-star review. And if you get a chance, please leave some nice words. I've gotten emails from a lot of you, see you at events, and many of you who I appreciate say some really great things. If you could go ahead and if you haven't contacted me, just leave a nice 5-star review, whether you listen to Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcast. It all helps out. And something else, secondly, many of you know I produce this podcast independently. This gives me the maximum flexibility, and I can bring the content that really you guys want to hear and listen to, and it helps not only who's listening now, but anybody in the future. However, there are some small costs associated with building out a podcast. And to kind of help me cover some of it, I've set up a Buy Me a Coffee page and included a link to that in the show notes. What is that? You may not have heard of it. Maybe you've heard of Patreon. It's not like Patreon. It's not a subscription. It's basically, think about it like a tip jar for your favorite barista or bartender or what have you. You can leave, I think, anywhere from $1 upwards, and it definitely will all go to help funding the monthly ongoing costs associated with the podcast. Thank you in advance. So that's it for me. On to the podcast. Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. Today's guest is Anton Posner, CEO at the Mercury Group and Mercury Resources, LLC. The Mercury Group is a supply chain management and consulting firm specializing in global commodity supply chain, collateral and finance management, along with physical inspection, survey, and audit services. Today, we're going to be talking to Anton about how digitization has played a role in the evolution of the side of the shipping business that Anton and his firm deals with. It's really interesting. It's a little bit outside of what kind of the traditional bulk commodities, although it is very related. It's a little bit a different look. Anton, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Chris. Great to be on today. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm excited. You have a great background and great history on how you got here. So talk to us a little bit about kind of what's the Mercury Group doing, what you're kind of like focusing on, and kind of where you are today.
Yeah, sure. So you gave a great, proper, and well stated description of the group. So we're a global supply chain management company focused on industrial commodities for the most part. So our business focuses on global bulk and breakbulk ocean freight, along with our joint venture partners, and in extensive inland logistics operations in North America in particular. Those logistics operations, inland logistics operations, focus on rail freight, barge freight on the Mississippi River system, truck freight operations, port stevedoring coordination. So all of the facets that go into the bulk and breakbulk supply chain for commodities, and particularly industrial commodities. Our commodity and cargo sector focus, as I mentioned, the industrial commodities that would encompass things like steel, metals such as aluminum, copper, zinc, lead, raw materials for those commodities such as bauxite, alumina, ferroalloys, things of in that realm, and then other bulk cargoes such as cement, fertilizers. We've done even some agricultural commodities over the years too, such as import organic soybean meal, for example. So we have client base that uses us in different capacities depending on the client. Some use us for more extensive supply chain management services as an outsourced uh, logistics management company to handle everything across the board, and then some that use us for more of a narrow focus, where it might be just rail freight management or potentially just ocean freight, for example. In addition to the supply chain services, we also provide collateral management and oversight services for banks and finance companies that are involved in financing the commodity industrial goods trade. For the banks that we work for, where we send surveyors and inspectors out into the field to perform audits on metals or alloys and coal. For example, we have worked with a subcontractor to fly drones in the air to measure outdoor stockpiles of coal and to determine the approximate volume in that stockpile. The drones measure the height and angle of repose, and then we work with the approximate bulk density to determine if the volume that's supposed to be there of that coal is actually there, approximately, of course, right? So we've worked hard to build a good, close reputational relationship with several banks and working to expand that to help prevent some of the fraud that's been so rampant in the commodities trade in different sectors, and made it onto the some of the front pages of even mainstream media in some cases, some big stories recently. So that's a good overview of us.
That's a fascinating look, and so many questions and thoughts about how moving into the digital world and some of the things that you're talking about, most particularly about surveying a coal pile remotely through a drone is something that even I would say 5 years ago didn't exist. Maybe 5 years ago people thought about it, maybe 10 years ago it didn't exist. So that leads me to kind of my question is given that we're moving in a digital age and a lot of parts of digitization, including e-bills of lading and other things, and that's more of a supply chain thing, and I think that's where the heart of your business is. Talk to me about some of the really highlight changes that you've seen since you started, and I think you started independently, if I remember correctly, probably about 6 years ago or so, but you've really been in the business for a lot longer, right? So I'm curious to see to hear about your change on how the digital fingerprint here for not only you but the clients and then trade in general.
It's a good question, and it has a twist of an answer. The answer to that is there has been very little change in it. And that's really the moral of the story, right? And when it comes to bulk and breakbulk supply chain management, there has been just very little change. You're still talking about, for the most part, original ocean bills of lading signed by a master and put into a FedEx envelope, FedEx envelope to ship out, to move to a bank for a letter of credit, and then sent out to the buyers to endorse in handwriting, stamped with a company stamp, and then carried up onto the ship by the ship agent to present to the master. That's still the vast majority of the world in bulk and breakbulk commodity trade. There are some inroads, of course, on digitization. The container world is a whole different world, right? Where there's far more electronic bills of lading and express bills of lading. I think they still use that term too. But when it comes to our world of bulk and breakbulk, it's still archaic in many ways. There's been a lot of work and energy and investment, many different platforms put into trying to aggregate information and data to piece together the more complicated and convoluted world of bulk and breakbulk supply chain management into one place where it can track. The problem is that unlike the world of container freight, where you have a steamship line like a Maersk or MSC or a CMA CGM that has a unit, right, a container that with a number on it, where the cargo stays in that one conveyance during the entire time, and the line has control of it the entire time. And this line, of course, whether it's CMA CGM or MSC, as I said, is fairly sophisticated company that has that is investing in technology. That's not the case when it comes to bulk and break bulk logistics. Bulk and break bulk logistics is a puzzle pieced together and reinvented almost every time, and it's pieced together with various supply chain service providers and operators and carriers of different levels of sophistication. So let's say that you're take an example of moving super sacks of magnesium chloride from India into the river system in the States. So you have a supplier in India trucking the super sacks of this product to the port, right, on trucks that there's no electronic digital way of tracking there. Then loading onto a break bulk ship in a carrier there that may or may not be able to send transmit electronic positions about and details of the cargo. That ship then arrives in New Orleans, and a stevedore goes onto the ship, deploys labor on the ship to work the ship in a transfer directly into barges, and those barges then are owned and operated by one of maybe 10 different companies on the river system. And these companies range from the larger ones that have some level of sophistication to some of the smaller ones that do not. Now you've moved it into this second conveyance, right? Well, third in this case, the trucks in India, the ocean vessel, and now barges. Then they barge upriver, and let's say they go upriver to Chicago, and the barge discharges into a warehouse. That terminal, that barge terminal upriver in Chicago, could be a mom and pop barge terminal. That's still, I always make a joke, but I'm not kidding, right? Some of them, there's one of them out there that still runs over to, if there's a problem in a barge, they run over to Photomat to get the pictures developed and put them in the mail to you, and stick a stamp on them, put them in the mail to you.
Oh,
So
that's
that's where
crazy.
so that's where your inventory is sitting, right? Sometimes they're more sophisticated facilities, perhaps. And then you go and book trucks to move the super sacks to the final destination, and you add on another conveyance, right, at this point, of varying levels of sophistication. So piecing all of this together seamlessly on a platform that can digitize this data is extremely difficult to do because of all of the different modes, the conveyances, the companies involved that would need to all be transmitting data back, right? And versus a container that could be tracked from origin through to destination, because you have one container number. It's not leaving, the cargo is not leaving the container, and it's going to be moved from the origin point onto the ship, off the ship, and to its final destination, all in that neat little box, right? With one container number assigned to it, and potentially tracking capabilities, right? Like RFID and other
Right.
more sophisticated ways. So now I think I gave you a good description, right, of a typical break bulk trade, and yeah, I
Yeah,
think that gives you a good overview.
it seems like it's fraught with a lot of challenges, and you just kind of pointed out, the lowest common denominator in terms of like where the business is in terms of sophistication. And I think a lot of people are looking at, when they talk about shipping, they talk about the companies who have the capacity and the resources to do a lot of this stuff. The issue is when you get down to the mom and pops, whether it's the warehouse, whether it's a barge service, whether it's maybe there was a barge, maybe even in India, where you're barging it out to a ship that can't get into the port.
Sure.
That's a whole other conveyance. I wonder, just from your point of view and where you sit with your level of experience, is this an opportunity? Do you actually see at some point, as people, as generationally, the company you described in Chicago, and not to pick on them because I don't even know who they are, you know, as they, let's say, sell their business or give their business to their children or grandchildren or what have you, and they say, wait, we're doing this all wrong. With a minimal investment, we can now be giving this sort of data. And not only that, but this sort of data is needed to give a more accurate footprint of carbon emissions and things like that. And I'm not talking about
hmm
controlling it. I'm just talking about give you a picture, right? And right now it's a lot of guesswork, but we could take some of
hmm
that guesswork out. Do you think this is an opportunity for people to start to come in and slowly but surely start to digitize some of that process? I mean, are you hopeful for that account, or do you think that, this is the way it's been, it'll always be until the end of time? What's your kind of take on that?
Yeah, I certainly don't want to sound like a dinosaur. How about that for a tie into the name
Yeah,
of
I love
the thing, right?
that.
Right, exactly. I tell you, it wasn't even in that direction, Chris, but you really led me into it.
Oh man, I
But
wasn't trying to do
uh,
that, man. Thanks. You get a sticker. I'll send you a sticker in the mail.
right, exactly. So, still very difficult to do. And give you an example, right? Working with we see platforms out there that are trying to get this done in different ways, right? And so they'll spend the time, right, to get a trucking company onboarded, right, to transmit the information back to the tracking platform of for each truck that's moving carrying copper, for example, right? And then you got a trading company that's trading copper, and after his trucking company has worked tirelessly to get that set up so they can send real time information on the position of the trucks and when they departed and what their position is and when they've unloaded, so that there's real time control of the metal in that case. Then you got one trader that's looking to make a trade and says, well, we're paying this guy too much. I got a trucker that's doing it, willing to do it for $200 a truck less. So let's change over to this guy, and then his logistics guy says, well, wait a second, we've just spent two months getting this other trucker
Yeah.
onboarded and connected to the platform. And what is the trader going to say? I don't know. The other traders aren't doing that. We got to sell
Yeah,
metal, right? So
it's an interesting thing because it does take, whether it's the example of the trader or other people, a little bit of metal, so to speak, or stick
hmm
to itness to say this is how
hmm
we're going to operate. Now, I think what will
right.
happen, maybe in your example or others, is when the bigger players start to require their vendors to get on board, so to speak.
Right.
And I think that,
Exactly.
again, not knowing
hmm
that trade, but if you look at any of the traders, at least from the oil side, whether it's a VTOL, Trafigura, so on and so forth, they say, look, this is how we're going to do it. And
hmm
even if they're, just knowing my time from the oil side, oil trades a million times before it hits the ship. So in this case,
hmm
I'm sure it's the same idea. And you have some of these smaller regional traders that get in. It's just a matter of time before the mothership starts to say, hey,
hmm
we need you to do this,
Yep.
and
hmm
by the way, we want it electronically. And then that'll then start to layer down into where it puts everybody on the same playing field, because then everybody's going to require, in the example that you have, all the truckers being on this thing, and you can't be
hmm
outbid by somebody who is not as sophisticated.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
I
That's
think it's
the
going to
thing.
take a while, but I do think you start to see some cracks. Obviously, you rightfully point out, in the container ship side, you start to see that. And I think the other thing which you haven't mentioned, and I'm going to say the S word, and that is standardization, because I know just from doing this podcast and in my role as a product manager, standardization is a bear, to put it politely.
hmm Yeah.
Whether
Hmm.
it's standardizing noon reports, which, you and I know from our days at SUNY, seems
Hmm.
to be pretty straightforward, but it really isn't when
Hmm.
you start to think about certain things. What speed are we doing? I remember having that discussion with my captain. He goes, well, put down 14 knots. I said, yeah, but we're heading north in the Gulf Stream, so we're going to be doing like 19. He's like, I said, so we're going to be like an hour early than what this says. He got mad at me once, I remember. But the point is, it's like standardization, right? Which I'm sure is
Hmm.
a challenge for your side of the business as well.
It's going to take some of the giants in the industry to set the tone, and then others will fall in line. I think immediately there'll be opportunities for smaller traders that can navigate around that and take advantage of savings potentially,
Yep.
where for working with vendors, right, that don't have to comply with that. I'll give you an example, right? Let's take on the environmental side of that too, right? We're working some ocean freight for a trading company recently that was requiring or requesting. Actually, let me retract the word requiring. We brought in a couple of ship owners on this trade for metals ocean freight. I think it was I think it was metal coming out of the Far East going into the North American market, for example, right? And the trading company assigned one of their people, this is a larger company, right? They assigned one of their people to request from us to request the ship owner to provide bunker consumption data so that they could keep track of the emissions on this. Well, okay, the request was put over to the ship operator, and ship operator, oh, okay, well, I'm not answering that. So it was an
Oh
email that
yeah.
just kind of fell off.
Yeah.
They sent a couple of chasers. Ship owner continued to ignore it because there was no requirement that this was required prior to fixing the ship. It was not a requirement that the ship owner had to do that, and ship owner felt that they weren't going to provide information that they weren't required to. Now, is this trading company maybe they're changing their approach and that they're going to make that a requirement on
Oh
future
yeah.
charter parties? Yeah, potentially, right? That's going to no doubt
Yeah.
come into play, but take what happens when that trading company starts writing off certain competitive ship owners that aren't playing ball,
Oh
and
yeah.
other companies that can easily execute these trades come in and have a much broader market to work with because they're not putting this restriction on ship owners, right?
Right, and absolutely. I mean, I've seen it happen with other type of clauses, just more
Hmm.
general clauses. I was
Hmm.
dealing with the charterer who was in Chapter 11 bankruptcy at the time, and there were certain clauses,
Hmm.
and some owners would deal with them, some owners wouldn't. And what
Hmm.
happened is the owners that dealt with those clauses, and they were a little bit, yeah, they weren't anything tricky. It was just a thing to deal with. That's kind of what it was. They were
Hmm.
rewarded at the end of the day because as the company came out of Chapter 11 bankruptcy, this particular charter was like, well, they never wanted to do business before. I'm not bothering with them.
Hmm.
Sorry. And
Yeah.
and that's kind of the mindset, right? The companies that were, I don't want to say flexible, I think is probably the right word. Flexible with
Hmm.
working with them. And I'm sure this is the same way with the with the emissions, because it's just a matter of time before companies just say, hey, we can't take you have some of the, we can't take a ship. You have some of the big companies like a Cargill. And if you go to look at
Hmm.
any conference, they're talking about this all over the place. And, they're going to have, people that they'll do business with. And then
Hmm.
eventually they're going to require, because it's all going to come down to, I think, it's all going to come down to the ability to kind of track as much as the carbon as possible so that when you actually have a good, whether it's a glass, whether it's a menswear, shoe, a car, whatever, you could say this is the carbon footprint. And
Hmm.
everybody's going to have to contribute their, what they say. And I think, that that's really going to be part of it. Obviously, with the European, system coming into play early next year, that's going to be also part of it. But, globally, I think that that more and more tracking just to keep track of, what your footprint is overall, I think is going to be
Mhm.
huge.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's a trickle down effect, right? It's gonna start from the larger players, and it will eventually filter down. In the meantime, I think there'll be opportunities for others to take advantage of these holes that are out there. But eventually, yeah, I agree with you. Eventually, those loopholes and those opportunities are going to close up more and more as becomes more prevalent for to require this. So,
Yeah, yeah, and that brings
mhm.
me kind of to one of my questions. As I mentioned, you and I went to school at the same time. It was a little while ago. So if you had somebody, whether they're high school age going to college, maybe just got out of college, and not necessarily one of the fine maritime institutions that we went to, but let's say a general, business school or something. Why should they come into our industry? What makes it so kind of attractive, or why should they be encouraged to do something in our space?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And as the father of 23-year-old twin girls who just graduated from college last year, it's very relevant to me. So, one of my daughters has gone into more into the medical profession, and she's heading to be a doctor of audiology. She's in
Oh
school in
wow.
Florida, so heading in that direction. And then the other one has fallen into our crazy world and is working at Marsh McLennan as a junior person in Manhattan, heading into the world of trade credit insurance. Right, so it's funny seeing the clients. She's junior and entry level, right? So she's working on invoices and things like this at this point, and studying now for her insurance broker's license. But trade credit insurance is key risk management for commodity trade and other types of trade business, right? Everything from retail to energy and commodities and agriculture and so forth, right? Everything that moves across the planet under on global trade. So so this is very relevant, right, to me, and I've explained to her at this point, while she feels that she's you know doing very entry level work at this point, which she is. I told her, you're getting the base knowledge on risk management, which is part of building a base of expertise towards many different parts of global international business, right, and global trade. This learning how to understand and understand risk, mitigate risk, manage risk, right, is one of the building blocks. And the reason, and go to the question that you asked, right, why get into this business that we're in, right, and you and I both work in a world of of global trade here. To me, I find it fascinating being behind the curtain, right? Everything that surrounds me here in my home office that I'm sitting in at this point came from different parts of world trade, right? I'm looking at the monitor sitting on my desk, and we know that that moved in a container, most likely from China into the United States, right? And looking at the wood on the desk that's here in the office, and perhaps that was made from lumber that came in from Europe on a ship from and was distributed to furniture maker, right? And then I'm looking at the paper on the calendar on my wall, and that might have come from pulp from Brazil on a ship, right? In breakbulk pulp packages, right? So this all there's elements of trade all around us, but understanding, as I'm looking around my home office here, understanding that all of these things surrounding me came from someplace. I feel like what we do sees is looking behind the curtain. uh, I tell you, Chris, good example. If you remember my roommate from Schuyler, Mike Yarrington, right?
Oh
Mike's
yeah.
work. Yeah, I remember Mike, right? So Mike's working at Maritime Administration in DC, and was talking to about our trade, about our business one day, and I mentioned Trafigura, right? Well, the second largest trading company, right, in commodities, and he hadn't heard of the name. before. Here's Glencore, right? That was obvious, but he hadn't heard of Trafigura, right? Number two. And so I said, Mike, do me a favor, go Google Trafigura and
Yeah.
then come back to me, right?
Yeah.
When Chris, and he called me back, he's like, oh my God, Anton, how did I never heard of the name of this company? They're
Yeah.
massive in energy and
Yeah.
metal. I said,
Yeah.
exactly, Mike. I said, these are the companies and traders, right? The Cargills and the Trafiguras and the Glencores, the ADMs and the
But
Bungies, right? And the
bunkies, yeah,
Gunvors,
sure. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
These
yeah.
are companies that are pulling so many of the strings of world trade. And I feel like to not know that they exist and to not understand what they're doing is just to not be
Yeah.
present in this world.
It's definitely when you speak to people who are on the US side, especially on the government, it's and rightfully so, it's just so focused. But you kind of try to get, this is part of the purpose of the podcast, is to give people kind of a worldview of things. And similarly situated, I have a sophomore in college and she's doing medical stuff, and I have a sophomore in
Mm-hmm.
high school. He's starting to ask me questions about trade and shipping and how does it work. I go, dude, just look around, man. Like everything everything here has been traded one way, shape, or form.
Mm-hmm.
And it's
Yep.
interesting. I always use this when I drive down 95. I can't help but to almost drive off the road because I'm looking at the container terminal, the airport, the trains. Then there's a couple of break bulk ships. There's a few barges. I mean, it's so just exciting, and it's all right there. And it makes, that's the thing that I think is interesting. And I think what makes it even cooler now is that, you don't have to necessarily have a maritime background. There are so many things, especially on the digital side, that they
Mm-hmm.
need people who are programmers. They need people who are
Mm-hmm.
marketing, product team. It's just so interesting. And not to say anything of the fact that you could be remote now and have a contribution. So you could sit in the middle of a country and not necessarily be in a seaport, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's, a hub center, whether it's here in the US, the New York, New Jersey area, Houston, Miami for the cruise ships, out in the West Coast for some things, Copenhagen, Hamburg, you could sit in the middle of Kansas and work for
Mm-hmm.
a shipping company for all intents and purposes. Doesn't
Yeah.
matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think
Right.
that's
Mm-hmm.
exciting as well. That's exciting as well
Yeah.
for people.
And to talk a little bit about the part of the business that you and I come from, right? I use the example of the trade credit and insurance and risk management, part where my daughter is, but one of the other building blocks is supply chain and logistics, right? It's so critical. A good trader, a good commercial person in global trade, whether it's commodities or non-commodities, whatever, a good commercial person or trader understands supply chain and understands logistics. There's enormous amounts of goods that move where the logistics costs, right, the transportation costs are a huge percentage of the
Right.
final cost of that, right? And
Yep.
and I 30 years doing this, I can tell a good trader from a bad one, right? The ones that get it, the ones that understand it, and the ones that figure out how to use how that the ones that figure out that having a proper supply chain plan and good people in place to manage it is critical for their P&L and when
Yep.
it comes to the trade. And then there are ones that are detached from reality, right? And they
Yeah.
don't last long
Yeah,
typically.
and it's funny because you said the people, right, and I think that's one of the things with digitization. Everybody's worried about their job, but I think that digital tools, even the ones that we kind of talked about, trying to keep track along the way, even if there
Mm-hmm.
is somebody said to me, I'd rather work for a company that has a 1% increase in that efficiency. I'd rather work for that company because that 1% increase in efficiency can be billions of dollars worth of trade
Mm-hmm.
that we
Yeah.
just made more efficient rather than working for another tech startup. And that was the answer to the same question that I had. And it sounds like if you can make a 1% increase in efficiency in dry bulk and bulk and break bulk trades, you can,
Mm-hmm.
that's a huge amount of money. That's an
Yeah.
enormous, and forget about a 10% or 20%, just make a 1% or a 2% increase. And I think that that's what's an attractive thing for people coming into the industry, is that you can take a look at that. As we wrap up, I love to ask this question. I know you're a busy guy. We were talking about, we'll catch up personally at some other time, but what are you reading? Are you reading anything good?
Yes. Let's see. I just started reading the new Sam Bankman Fried book that came out
Oh,
by Michael Lewis. I'm a big Michael Lewis fan.
oh yeah. Really
Glad to
good
ask it.
stuff.
It's called Going Infinite, right? Of course, Michael Lewis is the author of The Big Short, right? Another
Moneyball.
Liar's Poker and so forth, right? Moneyball, right? So his new book on Sam Bankman Fried, I'm about two chapters into it, and Margot would immediately call me out on this if I didn't say it. I like to listen to audiobooks. So when I say reading, I'm really
That's
listening to
okay.
the audiobook version,
That,
right? And Margot's my business partner and president and chief operating officer of the Mercury Group. For those of you who don't know her, Chris knows her, but schoolmate of ours also. However, anytime that I say the word reading, she will
that,
always correct and say that I'm actually listening to it. Anyway,
yeah.
I'm fascinated by the crypto crap, as I like
Oh
to call it,
yeah.
right? So, don't get me started on monopoly money and so forth. So this is absolutely fascinating to me that people will spend money, to an exchange run by Sam Bankman-Fried, sitting in the Bahamas in his flip-flops, and
Uh,
playing video games simultaneously while talking to Anna Wintour about sponsoring the Met Gala. So yeah, I am fascinated by. I love the books on Theranos, and
oh
of course
yeah.
the trafficker's recent getting suckered about $500 million worth of fake nickel, Orvis in Europe with billions of dollars of copper theft, right? So these large scale scams, the WeWork, right?
Or
You name it.
have you read
Yeah.
Dead in the Water? The book about,
Oh,
or
about
excuse me, the ship that with the with the Greek ship owner that allegedly, or according to the book, they basically blew up the ship, and then went to salvage it and the cargo and everything, and then somebody was murdered because I think it was an insurance adjuster that went on to say this
yes.
doesn't smell right,
I
and then
I
had the
I
report.
ha I have
Yeah.
it in my Audible queue here. I
Oh
started listening to
man,
a little bit of it. I moved on, but I need to go back to it.
oh,
So I was just,
you got it.
yeah.
Just a great book. I think it came out about a
Mm-hmm.
year ago. I read it.
Mm-hmm.
Did I buy it? Yeah, I must have. It must be in my bookcase somewhere. I was just looking for it. But you talk about the, if anybody's listening to this point in the podcast, I hope you still are. If you want to know about like kind of all the different tentacles that Maritime is touches, just read that book, because you probably get into about a half a dozen
Mm-hmm.
different, or a dozen different professions, from insurance to shipbroking to inspections to everything else in finance, and it's just amazing. And that to me is kind of one of the really interesting things about being in our industry, and the fact that, like, okay, people call me, yeah, you're an expert in maritime, Anton, you're an expert in maritime. We're two experts in completely different stuff, and that just also goes to show how big the industry is, which is another
Mm-hmm.
attractive part to people coming into our space, for sure. So thanks for coming on the podcast, Anton. I appreciate it. Wish you best of luck and all that good stuff. And we'll look forward to catching up. Thanks for coming on. I do appreciate
Mm-hmm.
it.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.